Hi, Dr. Poe. For my final, I thought I would do a little video and experiment analysis in regards to applying philosophy to the STARS posters. I know you're super excited to hear my lovely voice again, but I figured I can usually talk out my ideas better than write them, so hopefully you enjoy this short video. I like to try and apply the concepts I learned this semester to everyday life, and my life mainly revolves around psychology, so I thought I would do a little psychology experiment for my final to see where people in our community stand on injustice, oppression, and racism. The way I did this was through the development of a word association game. The concept was pretty simple. According to psychoanalytic theory, we all house subconscious feelings, desires, truths, that kind of stuff that we may not even consciously recognize that we're doing. So I thought to get at the heart of the issue, I would try and open people up to those inner feelings, so to speak. So the concept of the game was that I created a list of 18 words that I would read to people, and they had to say the first word that came to mind after I read a certain word. And then inside this list, I planted like trigger words, which were black, Mexican, Indian, Muslim, Asian, and oppression based off of the posters that we saw and the pictures that were depicted in them. And then I mixed those words in with random control group words such as school, phone, book, turtle, stuff like that, to make sure that they weren't relating the links between the trigger words. I did this test with 8 people, and although my original plan was to upload the videos I took of me actually doing the experiment with them, I unfortunately came across some technical difficulties and was unable to do this. So instead, I've decided to just tell you the words I found were the most interesting relations to the trigger words. So for the word black, the most common response I got was white. And for the word Mexican, the most common response was taco. For the word Indian, the most common response was food. For the word Muslim, the most common response was Osama. For the word Asian, the most common word was also food. And for the word oppression, the most common word was Jews. I thought that these relations were really interesting and began to hint at what the posters were saying, that as a society, we don't really see these people as a culture, but merely for the symbols, events, and what they look like. So then I took that idea and reread over the philosophers from this semester, and now I'd like to point out some of the things that I thought really stood out. So, starting with Young, I thought her most applicable points for the poster surrounded one of the things she said in the opening paragraph about in the Five Faces of Oppression piece, which is that the term oppression is not one typically used to name injustice in our society. And I thought that this was really relevant because even during the word association game, when I asked about the word oppression, the most common response was Jews, which are, I mean, obviously, yeah, that's oppressed, but like it didn't come up anything in our society that was really relevant right now, like Islam oppression or racism, which I thought might be a little more common. Um, this works with the posters too because I think that the people in the costumes probably thought they were being funny as opposed to hurtful. And then I began wondering whether Young would agree that these costumes even qualify as oppression. And then I decided that I definitely think she would. On page 41 of Five Faces, she states that oppression designates the disadvantage and injustice some people suffer not because of tyrannical power, but because of the everyday practices of a well intentioned liberal society. End quote. The people who dress up as terrorists may not intentionally be being oppressive or racist, but just trying to give humor and get a reaction. However, as Young points out, even the unintentioned job has a negative effect. It made me think of that old childhood adage that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. However, I think that with enough people throwing those sticks and stones, eventually they kind of pile up and smother you. And in these poster cases, they can smother entire cultures. Another point that Young makes to support that these posters signify oppression is when she talks about the concept of social groups. This was my favorite part of the readings we did this semester because I think it's really relevant to society right now. Not only are the people depicted in these pictures groups, but they're cultures, and diminishing the aspect of that is a lot worse than people think. People making jokes and costumes out of people's heritage takes away from their group and social identity, and this can lead to identity crisis and other ill-bidding results in society. from a psychological perspective, constantly being paired, for example, like Islam and terrorism, has such a critical impact on the psyche of the entire Muslim population, and it probably has a lot of unseen effects that we haven't even noticed yet. Moving on to West, that brings up the three fundamental points that he talks about in the piece on nihilism and Black justice. And his main points surround also around oppression and injustice. The first being that how people act and live are shaped, though in no way dictated, by the larger circumstances in which people find themselves. This is especially true socially because, as Jung stated earlier, social groups are where people learn some of their fundamental beliefs. The second point by West is that we should reject the idea that structures are primarily economic and political creatures, and I quote, an idea that sees culture as ephemeral set of behavioral attitudes and values. I think that this really applies to the posters because the costume show society as seeing culture as not for what it is, but rather as a mask or set of established behaviors used to characterize an entire culture, which is totally false. And then the third point that West makes is that we need to face up to the monumental eclipse of hope, the unprecedented collapse of meaning and disregard for human life and property. And then the example West uses to focus on is Black nihilism. And I truly believe that these hopeless and nihilistic views will manifest in Muslims, Native Americans, Asian culture, the exact same way that it has in our society for Black Americans. And he brings up that point in his paper too. I thought that at first these two philosophers were, like really different, but actually they're tied together in a way that I didn't see until I kind of looked at them through a perspective of the posters. They all encompass that philosopher's ideal in that they see a potential hope for society if we can just pull it together. And then my favorite part was Kelly Oliver. I think that was a really nice touch to end the semester because her pieces on love, ethics, and vision are really great in summing up what we should want to achieve in society. If we could just gain a new vision, like she talks about, to not only witness but create new relationships, society and the world would probably be a lot different. And ultimately, these posters and the injustice they show towards culture and people in general. And these are the cultures that helped create and make up society, so it's really interesting that we are tearing those down in the way that we are. And I really think that it's detrimental to our continued development as globally. So I hope that this worked for my video, and sorry I didn't get that part to upload. I don't know what was happening with that, but I hope you have a really good Christmas break, and I will see you next year.